Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome. Welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. I just want to go into a little flow where I tune into my higher guidance team after I talk a little bit about some of the energies that I've been sensing and feeling into. So we are all being bombarded, one might say, right now with light particles, waves of light, electrically charged energy that's coming from the sun, that's moving through our bodies, that's moving through our earth, that's moving through the waters that are in our bodies and on the earth. And so what happens is we feel this and it can, I'm hearing, shake up the loose particles. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I might do another video at some point where I talk about what the symptoms are, what it feels like, some of the things that you might want to potentially include in your diet. And I had a video I did years ago called Ascension Symptoms, which is what a lot of people were referring to, these higher energies back then. But now I've come to recognize this as less of a symptom but instead more of an activation, an up leveling, a frequency shift, one could say. And essentially what I'm being shown is it can cause friction. It can feel like we are there's some sort of rubbing that is uncomfortable and we can't quite figure out what it is, right? For some people, not for everyone. For some of us, we're feeling these high waves of love and light, and then we might go into a shift of an aha, or we have a connection with a kindred spirit on this level or on the other levels of reality, physicality or non-physicality. Everybody's journey is different and unique, but my intention is to simplify it. I think sometimes we can really get into our heads about what it looks like and what it feels like and why am I feeling this and why am I feeling that. And one of the things I've been called to remind everybody about is that we don't have to have a reason. It just is what it is. But on another level, the simplest reason is that we have more energy coming in from the sun, from coming up from the earth, and we are evolving, if we want to call it that. From another perspective, we're ascending, we're expanding, and that's it. It's that simple. And of course, there's many more intricacies that are involved in that. And it isn't always that simple from a human perspective. And so I will be happy to go into a video and maybe do an updated video on all of that. So that way you guys, if you feel called to go click on it, can maybe find some helpful hints or tools that might assist you on your journey in this process, going through this higher vibration. But one of the things that I tend to recognize when we have a large burst of what my guides call gamma rays, and that's a play on words. Gamma for me represents a higher state of consciousness, a higher brainwave frequency, a higher frequency of light. And so when we can find ourselves moving into a gamma state, one might refer to that as a higher dimension. One might refer to that as a higher frequency or vibration. And this isn't something that many of us are used to. And I'm being called to share. I'm not trying to use this interchangeably with really being in a state of gamma. It's a play on words. I'm being called to share. This is the kind of frequency that we're being bombarded with. Some of us will find ourselves being able to access a gamma state of consciousness, of For example, a brainwave frequency, conductivity. So we have alpha, theta, delta, right? Some of you have heard about being in the theta state or being in an alpha state. Alpha not as in dominating, but as in the brainwave frequency that allows us to focus, that brings us into maybe a cohesiveness of our left and right hemispheres in our brain, kind of connecting up and countering out what my guides continually say is we're creating this wave that is countering the scattered, loud particles of distortion that might be coming from the television, radio, etc., etc. So when we come into this synchronized brainwave space and we go through these different levels, and apologies if I'm not saying those levels in the correct order, but there's one that's the brain state that we tend to focus on a regular daily basis, where we're just talking with somebody, or then when we're focused and we're maybe studying or going into a space of meditation, we might go into a higher state or a more cohesive brain wave state, and then we go into a theta state. Well, there is a gamma state. So what I'm being called to share is we are being introduced to that. Some of us have already been there, done that. And for some of us, we've never experienced anything higher than an alpha state. And what I'm hearing is state of mind. Some people go through life just feeling anxious all of the time, or scattered, or unable to collect their thoughts. And that person is more likely to not reach those higher states of brain wave activity because they're not training themselves, or they're not allowing themselves to relax, to go. And we do have to relax in order to feel into that space of calm receptivity. And so we're really being called to allow these frequencies to charge our system. So when we go through these stasis, okay, I'm being called to play with this, states and stasis. So we're changing from one state to another. We're moving through, I keep hearing homeostasis. There's something about that. The water in our body is being charged. Our thoughts are being expanded, perhaps. We're having ahas. What I'm hearing is we're reconciling our differences. Okay, I'm being called to go into flow, but that's a perfect example. Right now, as I'm talking from a more linear and logical and analytical perspective based on what I've been seeing and feeling and experiencing in the field. However, my higher state of consciousness or awareness wants to come in and just go into flow and talk about it from a flow state. And that, when I do that, I find myself, my brain waves tune into a different frequency, if that makes sense. So one of the things I can share from a very human perspective, that this human who actually does energy work and channels and has mediumship abilities, or has played with these particular, we'll call brainwave states or frequency states, I shift and change and morph accordingly. But this is something I've had to practice in order to stabilize my frequency, in order to stabilize and recognize when those frequencies are shifting, if that makes sense. So when I'm sharing the physical experience, it tends to be a little bit more linear and keep it simple. When I go into my word flow, I'm pulling in these frequencies from many different directions, angles, points, and representations in a playful and poetic way that allows me to communicate in a very multidimensional codex that can then be interpreted by the listener in a myriad of ways. And each person will interpret it slightly different based on what they might need in that moment to gain from whatever it is I'm sharing vibrationally in word form, but also through the feeling and the tones, the sound behind the sound, I always call it, but it's the feeling behind what it is that I'm expressing. So we're being invited to recognize that a merge is happening, a merge of higher consciousness. And we're getting this help directly from the energy that we're directly infused in. So the sun is necessary for our life. We could not have life if it weren't for the support of the sun. Same with water, etc., etc., and oxygen, which is an element, right? So we're utilizing all of these forms of energy to further enhance our form, physical form, and our energy, and to further enhance how it is that we interact with and through this medium or this form, and how it is that we receive information. But we cannot receive that information if we aren't allowing ourselves to relax and receive. So we oftentimes, and I'm being called to stop and play with that for a moment. What I'll add to that is we're constantly receiving. There's constantly things that are coming in. If we're not open to it, it's not as if we're never going to get it. And it's not as if we're not receiving it in some way. We just need not be receiving it to the most expansibility, in the most expansive way. So therefore, we might only get 1/16 of it because we're deflecting the rest of it. Or sometimes I'm shown that it hangs out in pockets. So we might be in resistance. And so we're still receiving it, but we're not fully able to integrate it and truly receive it, right? We get it, but we're not digesting it. It's not serving us to its highest capacity. And so sometimes then it sits in our body, or it pools in certain, what I'm hearing are pockets. And then that can be received or opened once we step into a space in which we're able to unwrap it, if that makes sense. So these are just all from my perspective, what I've experienced and what I've been shown on my own journey. And so I'm resisting a bit right now so that I can stay in this linear conversation. However, I'm simultaneously recognizing that I'm receiving messages and downloads. And so part of me is opening to that. I'm not ignoring it, if that makes sense. And so I'm inviting everybody to start to witness that in our own daily activities, recognizing that we might be receiving something. Perhaps we're in the process of working on a project, or having a conversation with our child, or maybe we have to work. So we're not ignoring it. If we can get into that space of recognizing, wow, something's coming in right now. Yes, please. More of that, please. But then communicating and saying, I'll have to open this a little bit later, but let's hang on. Let's absorb as much as we can from as balanced of a space as we can. I had this picture just pop into my head of, somebody driving their car, or being in the middle of helping someone with their groceries, and then they get the message, that they're meant to do more with their life, or whatever it might be, and then they just drop the groceries and walk out and not pay attention to a car driving by or the person that they were in the middle of helping. So there is a balance. And so part of what I'm being guided to share with everyone is that we're in the process of learning how to balance. We're in the process of balancing, and we're in a transition, which I talked about in my previous video, of one phase into another, and we're transitioning we're learning how to transition as gracefully as possible in order to access more of what we already have perhaps stored in these pockets, or access more that's inbound, is what I'm hearing. So one of the messages too is not to get caught up in, did I miss out? Or I'm not feeling that, so I must be doing something wrong. I'm always called to remind everybody of that, because there will be more, and we will receive it when we're ready to. Sometimes it can be too much, and it can cause an overload in our nervous system if we aren't balancing out and recognizing that it's too much. And so sometimes what I'm hearing is it needs to be more of a conscious interaction with spirit. So what I would suggest, and I'm being called to share, is recognizing when we are on system overload, and then maybe communicating with ourselves saying, can we just pause for a moment? I do this with my spirit source, guides, higher self, whatever we want to call that energy that moves through us, that's a higher frequency. I do it through pictures. And I was taught this a long time ago from a friend of mine. She didn't teach me how to do it. She just said, Carrie, I just communicate through pictures. And I had been communicating previous to that through words or affirmations or writing things down. And it didn't occur to me to send a picture back to the universe showing it what I needed. So if I'm working in a session with someone, because I could go on and on for hours, and oftentimes if you've ever worked with me, the session does run over. And my guidance team is like, look, you have to be more cognizant or conscientious of others' time and also your own. And so I started paying more attention, even though I was having so much fun with it, or there were more messages that wanted to come in, and sent up a picture of a stop sign, or I will be writing in a journal in my mind's eye, and I then close the journal. Whatever signal and sign works for you. And it might be a physical putting your hand up, or doing this, stop. Or it might be saying it out loud. It might be that really works well for you. From my perspective, I was shown many different tools so that I could share with everyone many different tools. So whatever works for you, and again, keep it simple. You might have to play with it, and one might work better than the other, but you don't know until you try. So some of the currents that are coming through, I've come to recognize when we are getting heightened electrical activity. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's very obvious. The obvious signs would be trouble sleeping. And by the way, this could be for a myriad of reasons. I'm not saying the reason you're having trouble sleeping is because of this heightened energy. But what I am sharing is there is a potential that this is adding to that particular difficulty. It might be waking up at certain times that you don't usually wake up at. It could be twitches in the body, muscle twitches, electrical pulses in the body of synapses firing, and muscles. What I'm hearing is kind of rearranging their schematic, because our body is shifting. Our body is an amazing, amazing technological tool from one perspective of innate technology. I've done a lot of videos on it because I find it so fascinating. So the body is very much working overtime right now to try to help us adapt as quickly as possible to the higher frequencies that are coming in. So the more we can communicate with our body and recognize that that's what's happening, and asking our bodies, what do I need to fully support the system that I came here with, to do what it is I came here to do in my highest well-being, in my highest joy, in my highest creativity, in my highest happiness, physical well-being, so on and so forth. And you might be surprised at how those answers come through. You might be very thirsty. That's your body saying you need more water. You might have a lot of synchronicities come up about oranges. And that could mean you need more vitamin C, or the vitamins or nutrients that are found in the fruit orange. It could be something having to do with the sacral chakra, representing orange and its opening. I use all of these symbols to kind of then further investigate where and what my body or intuition is trying to communicate with me. So it's not a one-way street. I'm communicating mentally and asking myself, as the captain of my ship, what do you need? And the ship, which is a living, breathing encasement of our soul, is communicating back. And I'm getting goosebumps on that. There's another example that I share a lot of how our body communicates with us. Yes, this is a shareable piece of information, as Dan Winters would call it. So getting back to the electrical. So as these electrical impulses move through the body, it can stimulate our senses, and we can feel sometimes like we're being overloaded by this stimulation. So sometimes it's important for us to cut down on the stimulation that we might usually find fun, or we might be addicted to, such as gaming, or constantly being on our devices. It might be that we need to take a day and unplug off of social media and go outside and sit in the sun, or perhaps put our feet in water. And I've been shown also that even if you're someplace that's cold, the snow, connecting with water that has transitioned in its own way in a vibratory speed, can also be beneficial. So recognizing that Mother Nature, in all of her aspects, just like our physical body, is able to assist us. We have water in our body, we have crystals in our body, we have salt in our body, we have oxygen moving through our body. We are the body, just as Earth is a body. So the body of Earth holds, there's a whole other video, but it holds a soul, essentially, of Earth, just like our bodies hold a soul or an aspect of Source. We might have heightened, so recognizing that. And these heightened states of joy, what's interesting, I have found, if we're in, let's say things have been very unsatisfying. Is that right? A word? Dissatisfying, unsatisfying, feeling unsatisfied. I play with words so much that I start to make up my own words. But we've had that feeling, and now all of a sudden we feel vibrant and alive. And it could be that it's due to an interaction we've had with someone else, as I've shared recently, through friendship, or partners, or family, or whatever it is, human interaction. Or it could be because of the energy that's coming in from the sun that has now heightened and allowed the, I'm just being shown debris, and I'm being shown, dirt to be moved around so that we can, wow, I feel something has shifted. That's important to recognize and say that, not necessarily out loud, but in the saying it to ourselves or recognizing it, it does something to our ability to integrate it more fully. From my perspective, it enhances our capacity for recognition and recognizing what our environment is offering us and what our communication channels are communicating with us. So I kind of got a little bit lost in that particular tangent. But essentially, it's all about communication. So the sun, it might be a good idea to go in the sun with the intention of connecting with that frequency and that energy. And if it's too much, potentially taking a cold shower or a cool bath or doing an ice bath or just laying on the ground. And that's so important for so many reasons. And that's, again, perhaps another video. I have an infinite amount of videos I like to do. So just being aware of this right now, this overstimulation can surge through. We're all channels. We're all conduits of energy. So being very aware of how it is that we're channeling this energy is also important for how we direct it, where we direct it, how much, I talked about this earlier, how much we receive, how much we are able to then process, and giving ourselves ample time. This is a play on words: amplitude, ample time, amplification, giving ourselves the ability to not necessarily run a marathon because we feel so good and then be completely wiped out the next day. Because just because we feel good in this moment doesn't mean that that energy is going to continually be provided for us. And the reason is, from my perspective and what I've been shown, is we're, again, transitioning. So while you go through this, we have to adapt to these higher frequencies and these higher levels. And our body sometimes has to go through this metamorphosis. And we have to find that balance, right? Balance it out and allow ourselves to feel balanced. And I just realized I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday about these high energies and then feeling on top of the world, but we have to find balance and not only focus on that, because it is about embodiment. And our support system, boots on the ground. So yeah, so I'm gonna go in a little flow from there. I could keep going, but I'm being called to I'll do a separate video. So I'll probably end on this note and do a separate video, part 2. I hope someone found this helpful, and so many messages. Lastly, I will share, if you're feeling overwhelmed because there's so much coming in, I can really say from my own experience, meditation, breath work, I could say it over and over again, but we forget, right? We just sometimes get so caught up that we forget, oh yeah, I used to meditate. Oh yeah, someone mentioned that to me yesterday. Oh, journaling might be helpful right now. I had recently found all of my journals that I kept when I was going through a massive purge, and I was really sick, pretty much right before I started this YouTube channel. And it was such a powerful experience for me. I felt like the only thing I could do was write it down, because nobody understood at that time what I was going through. I didn't understand what I was going through. And now here I am years later, still processing it. So that's the other big message that's coming through, and I'm getting goosebumps, is to recognize you don't have to process it all now. You don't have to absorb it all now. Just like my dear friend told me the other day, she said, you don't have to share all of the information now. I had a reading years ago and was told by Andrew Bartzis even, you're writing about the future. They're not ready for it yet. And I wanted to share it all now. What I'm hearing is in due process. So that's a play on words. And I'm seeing dew, like drops of dew, and how it forms and how it's absorbed, and how sometimes in the shade it takes longer to absorb, and then it evaporates when the light hits it and it's absorbed. There's so much, and how much is held within the dew, but also in due process. So it's sometimes we have to go through the steps. We have to go through the process in order to fully benefit from what it is that we are processing, receiving, etc., etc. So really allowing ourselves the time sometimes that it's necessary in order to do that. Would I have liked to have fully understood then what I understand now? Absolutely. And I asked for it. And boy, oh boy, did I get it. Bring it on. And it got brought. And it brought me to my knees, literally. I couldn't get out of bed at times. I know I've spoken with so many of you, beautiful people out there. All these names of beautiful friends and people I've worked with and fellow humans who've gone through similar experiences. We've all gone through it, or many of us have gone through it in our own way, and it takes time. Some of us are still going through it. Some of us still have days that we are unable to leave our house because our Kundalini activated and we are feeling so heightened by everything that even the sound of a car alarm sets us off, or our what's it called when our telepathy is kicked on full throttle and we're starting to think that everybody else's thoughts are our thoughts. Am I thinking that? Are they thinking that? For other people, it's just emotions. They can't stop crying and they don't know why. For other people, there's a lot of anger that's coming up and they can't quite get rid of it. Maybe because all of that is meant to be felt, processed, integrated. And what I always say is acknowledged. What do I always say? Acknowledge it, recognize it. Those are my favorite. AR, acknowledge, recognize it, and then allow it to be integrated. So I'm going to end on that note. I could keep going and going. In love and light, guys. Namaste.